but I suppose we should get started. So I thought today Andrew has to leave shortly after 12, so we probably have just about an hour. You can tell us when we need to wrap things up. So we won't spend a lot of time recapping last week's discussion, which was the format I had proposed, but I know that Andrew did have one kind of major takeaway from last week's discussion, if you want to.
Well, I think I brought it up, but just to remind it, what struck me was the part of the conversation where we talked about how you can be open to and kind of absorbed by the strength of a writer and yet hate what they're saying. It actually reminded me, I think, of when I was young reading 1984. Like, that was a completely gripping work that I couldn't put down, and at the end I just wanted to burn it, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was something that was important for me, helpful for me in last week's discussion.
Yes, and I really liked, Greta and I have spoken repeatedly since last week about that phenomenon of feeling like we don't appreciate something because we are not yet equal to it. There are a number of things for both of us that are in that category, and I think it's a good, healthy attitude to have. That I know a lot of people that I respect who respect this author and who are capable of being moved by this work. So that I am not yet in that category is a weakness in me and something to work towards, as opposed to writing. I think often people are too quick to write off the author or just sort of dismiss the possibility of that connection being formed, because if it's, and that's one thing that Bennett talks a lot about in these last chapters, that the fact that it's not an automatic connection doesn't mean that the potential for connection is there, and even stronger, that it's never, if it's the highest of quality, it's not going to be automatic. It's going to require work. So that's something I've been keeping in mind. So did you want to, what would you like to start with?
Well, I'm wondering, given that, maybe could we start with chapter 7 and then come back to chapter 6? Because that fits really well with what he says in chapter 7 about the problems that you're going to encounter after having first given yourself over to reading and then even studying a guy like Charles Lamb. He starts talking about the great gulf there might be, because it's not the experience you had anticipated it would be from all the hype. So, and he gives two reasons why he thinks that gulf can arise, and then how to overcome them, starting about, there's 4 paragraphs into it. So are we clear what what is it he thinks we need to do? What causes that gulf, and how do we cross it?
So I think I have the two things that you're referring to. One is that you're coming into society with a mental superior. And I loved the description of he is not apologetic about there being superiors and inferiors. So he asks us all to stand in the position that many of us have been in many times, of speaking to a mental inferior and making jokes that they don't get and making references to things that they don't appreciate. So then flips that and says, okay, that's you when you're reading this author. So Charles Lamb, you have to take the attitude that Charles Lamb was a greater man than I am, cleverer, sharper, subtler, finer, intellectually more powerful, and with keener eyes for beauty. I must brace myself to follow his lead.
Yeah, so what did others think about that?
Well, one thing that I can say is that this is what I've tried to do. I've given some poetry courses. I think a lot of people here have attended them. And what I've tried to do is recreate the entirety of that experience in real time, which is it is a fascinating and challenging thing to do. So take a poem. I have started a couple of them on First Looking into Chapman's Homer by Keats. And I will read it to them in a flat tone of voice to start. And that is the experience for me of reading a poem for the first time. It's flat because the words don't mean anything to me. So I'm just reading words. And they'll have the experience of not in any way being able to comprehend what was just said to them. And then piece by piece, break it down, translate, look up words, explain some things as we go. And then at the end of it, go back and read the poem again. And it's a completely and utterly different experience for people. And if I've done it correctly, emotionally moving. So to go from these are just words that are empty and have no impact on me whatsoever, to I think within 15, 20 minutes, I can accomplish it, actually take it in a way that's emotionally moving, demonstrates the point he's making here very well. I think that at first you might be bored, it might not be diverting, you might not be interested, but if you do the work, then what you're going to find at the end is it's something more powerful than the thing that would be immediately accessible when you read it the first time.
Molly?
Yeah, I have an example from Dream Children. I read that a few times. And the first time I read it, I liked the twist ending and thought that was the whole point, and was very moved by the loss of these imaginary children. But then I read it again, and there's all sorts of other things in it that I completely forgot were there and just completely drove by without seeing, and was stunned at how much he could pack into 3 pages. And then I read it again and had the same experience the third time compared to the second time, and the fourth time compared to the third time. It's like each iteration of the story was brand new, and I had completely missed the point. And so it didn't only bear repeating, it was as if my first impression was not at all what he wrote.
So when I
it just got richer and richer.
When I lead discussions, I generally, especially if it's a shorter work, I'll say, okay, now go back and reread that sometime the next day or two and see how much more you're going to see in it, not just on your second read, but after the discussion, and pointed out important points that you had ignored or thought you understood, things like that. Go back and read it a second time and see what it's like. That's why my profession is wonderful, because I get to go back to the books again and again. and so often when I'm doing our upper division seminar, you got a lot of reading to do. So I'll think, I'm just going to blow through this one. I know this, and I start reading it, and it's like, no, I just get caught up again.
Well, I was trying to summarize it for myself, and I couldn't. And so I read it again, and then I really couldn't, because there was so much more in it that I couldn't condense it.
What was do you remember something you saw in the second time that you'd forgotten?
Yeah, the ghosts gliding up and down the staircase. Completely went by that. I think I read it the first time and thought, oh, those are the dream children. But then I got to the end of the story and forgot about those ghosts. And then the second time through reading it, I thought, oh, wait, there are ghosts in this story this early on. So I just completely forgot that they were there.
So I think that what we're talking about now kind of pertains to the general advice he gives, or general direction he gives at the beginning of the chapter. He says, yes, I'm recommending studying. It's a course of study to get into these authors. So that's spending time with them, being willing to go back again and look at things more, read more until you start to see what it is that the people who recommend the author are what it is that they find this kind of pleasure in.
Mhm.
But then if we go back to the first thing that Lisa was talking about, his claim that it's difficult, the difficulty can arise that you just don't enjoy it as much. It's the attitude, I guess, that you have to have about the author compared to you,
Mhm.
that he's emphasizing, that, you know, that the first thing you need to do in order to cross the gulf, that you have to say, to expect this author is a mental superior.
Mhm.
Do we is that difficult for people? Is it the way? I know it's one of the things that really annoys me when I hear most people talk about authors that I've read, is a kind of modern patronizing attitude
Mm.
that they have towards them.
Mm.
They'll be take difficult points, and rather than confronting them as though they're worth thinking about, they'll say, "Oh, this author was in a different time and place. He didn't have our modern enlightened sensibilities about things." So they'll tend to read them. They tend to just apologize for them, rather than saying, "Well, if this guy took this kind of position seriously, I should really wrestle with him on it and expect that there's something more that I'm not seeing."
Mm.
Just for me personally, I'm very used to feeling stupid, during while getting my math PhD, and just like, okay, we have this wall of text, and I'm going to spend 3 hours going through 4 pages. So it's very. I'm okay with feeling like, okay, this person is way beyond me. It's a little harder when you get to literature, because it's not as obvious that that person is really coming up with something brilliant. It's not like the proof isn't in the pudding, or so to speak. Like, you can't just point and say, "Yeah, you see, like, industrial civilization wouldn't exist without this."
Mm.
So it's harder to do that, to be sympathetic. Yeah.
Heather?
Thanks. Yeah. I just wanted to bring in something else that's in this chapter, which is the idea that you might be ruining yourself for what you're reading somehow. When he talks about taste and how there's a subtler
Mhm.
taste that you're picking up in literature, and you can actually ruin yourself for that by enjoying the cruder pleasures. And I think that comes out when he's talking about the intellectually inferior person, because he does talk about how they think that what he thinks is amazing, you think is coarse and unworthy. So I think it's partly that too, of saying, okay, if I am not getting this, what else do I take this kind of pleasure in? What do I understand? And is that like affecting my attention, or affecting my my ability to see something else in this?
Yeah, I love the metaphor of the Worcester sauce. Yeah,
So for
something
me,
that
it's
just
ketchup. I thought it was interesting.
or it can go back to Zach's cheese analogy last time. If you're just, but it's such an interesting comparison. It's one of the struggles. So one of the struggles with the Read With Me program is that I'm presenting this as a leisure activity, as something, and he does, I mean, not leisure in the sense that it isn't bringing something significant to your life, but it's meant to be something pleasurable that you do that's outside of your kind of career and life purpose. And it is meant to be pleasurable. But you know, when we spend our leisure time with art, watching Netflix, the pleasure, there's like a more direct channel from the stimulus and the pleasure response, but it's not the same experience. It isn't one that leaves the same mark on you, or that moves you in to the same extent. So there's this funny idea of this being kind of a leisure activity for pleasure, but it also takes work. And we seem to have, more and more just kind of separated the idea that pleasure takes work.
Mhm. Yes. Oh, sorry, Raj.
So I think that, there's simple analogies for this, right? Like skiing, like I had such a hard time when I first learned how to ski. I fell, it was embarrassing, etc., etc. But then, once you put in the effort, because you see all these people are skiing so well and they seem to be having a fantastic time, so skiing would be an analogy, or playing tennis. It takes some time to learn how to play tennis, and then you can really enjoy yourself. So I don't know if an analogy from a different kind of pleasure helps at all.
Yeah, that fits with what I was thinking too. There's a tremendous pleasure in being part of a basketball team where you actually are working together with an offense and a defense. You know where each other is. You can anticipate where the person's going to be, make the passes, all that sort of thing. That's not something you can experience if you don't work at it for quite a while.
Yeah.
So that second thing he says, we have to cross the gulf of realizing that the pleasures you're going to get are of a higher quality than the ones that are most readily accessible to people.
Mm-hmm.
I wish he hadn't. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Raj.
I wish he hadn't used the term mental superior. Like, so if I have a ski instructor and they're able to ski so easily and I'm falling down and struggling, I don't necessarily think that they are my superior, just that they, in this area, they know more than me. Whatever it is that I'm trying to do, they know more than me, or maybe I don't have as much experience reading difficult literature or poetry. You see my point? Like when he says mental superior, it seems to be like a blanket statement and might make a person feel small. I don't mind that much. I wish he had used a different term, and that's fine.
So I'm wondering, this kind of goes back to what Ray was asking about. I think it's connected here. How do we know, how can you tell when you're reading an author and you're not being wowed by the author? Are you dealing with somebody who's really a mental, that you should take this attitude, or is it somebody say, no, it's not my fault, it's his? How is Bennett giving us any criterion by which we can make that judgment?
Well, I think he gave us the criteria of authority earlier, that if someone you trust and respect says there's something here and you don't see it, then that's a signal that it's you.
Yeah, my first encounter with T.S. Eliot was in college, and it was with The Wasteland. And I just recall the volume of footnotes and my annoyance with having to understand symbolism outside of a poem in order to appreciate the poem. And I wrote it at the time, I wrote it off. I was like, no, this poetry is not for me. And then two things happened. One is that Douglas Murray, a writer for whom I have a great deal of respect, especially when it comes to aesthetic appreciation, called T.S. Eliot the greatest poet who has ever lived. And two, I went to TAC to visit, and I went into the bookstore, and there is The Wasteland on the shelf. So I have decided that T.S. Eliot is something I must. So it's just on the basis of.
I had a very similar experience with The Wasteland.
Okay.
That it wasn't just that it wasn't for me. I thought, who is this person to expect me to have all of this background in order to appreciate? Is he just showing off? He's being I don't know. Yeah, is it a fake? Is it really fake?
Or not to expect you, but
erudition.
Yeah.
But then one of our most respected tutors at the college was a big fan, and then he started talking to me about it and helped me to understand much more what was going on with Eliot. And then that encouraged me to, even just the fact that he had so much respect for it, made me take it more seriously and begin to feel it more than.
Yeah.
Do either of you like it now?
Yes.
I haven't gotten there yet. You have. Okay.
Oh yes, yes. There's some. and it didn't really involve involve extensive look at the footnotes. It kind of involved more reading through parts slowly, letting the images kind of wash over me without demanding the immediate intelligibility I'm used to. And then a few of the notes were helpful, but more it was just in letting it speak to me on its own terms instead of demanding that it conform to my taste in poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with The Sound and the Fury by Faulkner. Like, it's when you open up that book, it just looks like nonsense on a certain level. It's just so discombobulated and from fractured perspectives. But I mean, once you get through the whole thing, it all pulls together, and it's a magnificent experience.
So I do have to, we were talking a little bit before the session started, and I said chapter 7 just stimulates all these, in my mind, all these themes of education. And I just want to bring up one, that the idea that it takes work, but the work will pay off, that you have to wrestle with the author, that it takes a course of study. This to me is one of the great failures of education, because all of us ideally ought to have had that experience repeatedly as we were being educated, and not had to be in the position of choosing which authors that it's worth it to somebody. Our teachers ought to have chosen that for us and guided us through that process.
Well, and not only that, but they should have had their primary goal should be to form literary taste. That should be the first thing that they're doing with the students, rather than making it an academic, giving a kind of academic breakdown the way that literature professors would be interested in.
Yes. Yeah. So sorry, you've got to stop it. My dog's making trouble. Academic is the best I can hope for at this point. Usually it's utterly neglected. I mean, I'm hearing more and more about kids who just don't read at all. Or this is my problem with, again, the more self-directed classroom, or the premise that you have to let the child's tastes lead them. Otherwise, they're not going to be properly motivated. They're going to be, and ought to be, inherently resistant to authority. We have to give them agency and choice, and allow them to invest themselves in it, or they're never, or the idea is either they're just following along with authority and learning to be submissive and intellectually dependent, or they're fake, they're just going to be, they're never going to actually connect with the work. But in reality, they need somebody who does have that kind of attachment and connection and passion, and has had the experience of doing the work and reaping the rewards, guide them through the process of doing that. And when I always give the example of the Maupassant story, Boule de Suif. It's one I teach every year in 8th grade. If a student in 8th grade were to pick that up off the shelf and read the first paragraph, which is like maybe one sentence, an entire paragraph, and it's about the Franco-Prussian War, I guarantee every single one of them would put it back down. It's not going to strike them as, oh, this book connects with my interests at this stage in my life. And I have yet to have a student who does not end the book without a feeling of intense moral righteousness at the conclusion. I mean, they become very emotionally involved in it, but they needed me to help them through that. So I just like the idea of both regarding the work itself as something that is above us until we do the work to reach it, and needing people who are above us in being able to do that process to guide us to that goal.
Andrew said something really interesting too, though, that the first goal is just to help them enjoy the stories and develop the taste. And I was at VanDamme Academy a few weeks ago, and I made a point of sitting in on the younger students' classes. And Mrs. Steele does such a good job. Like when they're reflecting on their readings, and these are grade 4 and younger. I was
Mhm.
primarily looking at, even younger than that. And it's just the first few minutes of class is just relishing in the last chapter they read, and then letting the students just say their favorites and could be excited about what they read or be angry with a character. And you can tell they're just enjoying literature.
Mhm.
And before they start to dig beyond that, and it's like priming them for Lisa.
I was struck by the what he said at the end of the second paragraph in this chapter, that well, a number of things there. What are the advantages you're going to derive from this kind of study of Charles Lamb as your starting point? And he talks about the moral advantage, and I think he identifies a number of things. You really know something about something.
Mhm.
You're now in a position to judge what other people say about Charles Lamb. You become an expert in him. And then he says this indirect moral advantage even outweighs for the moment the direct literary advantages. So it's this, I thought that was pretty striking. And I think it connects with the having as your goal as a teacher, wanting to form literary taste so that they learn to enjoy the right kinds of things, not just giving them books that you say, we want to get them reading, so get them reading on anything. And then also this, that when they come to really know an author, then to have that moral experience of being able to judge well what others are saying. Molly, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Molly.
I say Molly was
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I had a question. So I don't know if this is sort of jumping ahead of ourselves, but do you ever reach a point where you can say, I've tried that author, I've done the work, I've studied him, and I understand what he's saying, but I don't like him. Like, I can't appreciate his perspective. Or is that always off the table because he's on the list of classics, and so therefore
it would be
you're
one
just
thing to
never going
say-
to be worthy?
I guess this was the thing that struck me in our last conversations, that it's one thing to say, I don't like this person, I don't like what they're saying, I disagree with it, I think that they're doing something bad. That's different from saying they don't have any talent. They're really a bad writer. Not just I dislike them, like for me it was Orwell's 1984. Like, I hated the ending, though I think that's what he wanted me to write. But I was so depressed at it. Did I really want to read that book again? Probably not. But it's not to deny that it was very, very one of the most powerful reading experiences I've ever had.
So how do
On
you know
the-
when you reach that point is, I guess, the question. How do you know that you're done with the work and have made a good judgment?
Well, wouldn't part of Bennett's answer be you don't have to? You get to just follow your own. I mean, within the canon, you can just follow your own taste and your own inclinations. And I loved the idea, the suggestion of, it's funny because the very Charles Lamb's circle, he doesn't mention Keats, interestingly, but Keats, that was Keats's circle. And so all of those are names that are familiar to me from writing a lecture about Keats and researching. And so it just felt like, oh yes, all those people, I'd want to follow the path that leads me to all of them. So I liked that license of just kind of find what you love and keep following what trail it leads you to.
Then let me add something. We were talking a little bit before this. So much of this has struck me as like Aristotle. What Aristotle says about how to become a morally excellent person. You have to just follow somebody who you think is. Do you make your best judgment? Listen to people about who is a morally excellent person. Then you follow them and you try to pick up on things that they say and do. You ask them questions. Why did you do that? That sort of, and then you are always making judgments kind of on the outside. Am I doing it like that person? Am I doing it like what's approved or not? But that's external judgment. But to really become morally excellent, you have to have that experience of now I see it myself.
Mm-hmm.
and have the internal experience of seeing the good, making the difficult decision, carrying it through, and then in the end saying, yes, that was right.
Mm.
You have there's a transition you have to go through. And I think that that's what he's saying here about Lamb. When you make this kind of study of an author, you're going to, at some point, you're going to realize, yes, I am getting this. Yes, I am in a position where I know it. And then having had that internal experience with one author, you're going to then be able to have it when you start reading other authors. You can say, I'm not there yet. I'm not with this author. I haven't understood this author like I did Lamb. But now I have, and I still find them deficient. That's how the one internal experience will allow for others, I think.
Mm.
Raj, you've been waiting a long time.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, for children, we have recommendations, like Lisa also provides recommendations. Certain books are suitable for 5th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, or whatever. And it's not wise probably to give a 5th grade child something that would be more suitable for an adult, because they won't really be able to grasp it perhaps at the level that they should, etc. So I'm all fired up from our discussions to kind of like set aside time every week, like Bennett is recommending, and to read literature more systematically rather than whatever that my mind is inclined towards. So my question is for adults like ourselves, which I guess is the purpose of this book, do you think that there should be some similarly levels, in children we go by their age, but for adults, should there be level 1, level 2, level 3, something like that? Don't try to understand T.S. Eliot's Wasteland as literally when you start out to develop your literary taste as your very first thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like for Victor Hugo, it was recommended to me. I can't remember if Lisa said this or somebody said this, that read 93 first
Mm-hmm.
and Les Mis later. And I followed that advice. And I think that was whoever gave that advice. I am grateful to them. So anyway, that's my question, whether there should be for adults. I'm just summarizing now what I said, whether levels that it's not, that will give us some idea of the level of difficulty in grasping or fully enjoying that material.
Joseph, do you want to say why you're grinning at that question?
It's funny because earlier this week, I proposed to Lisa whether I should build into the Read With Me app a feature where there's a path you can go down, right? If you want to develop your taste, and we'll just tell you what book to start. And Lisa shut it down pretty quickly. She said, there is no hierarchy there. You should just read everything in the Read With Me library.
Well,
no, I think that
No,
the very reason he's recommending Lamb as a starting point is because he thinks Lamb is a good entry point, right? He's not.
Right. No, my only point was that the Read With Me list currently is curated specifically to that purpose, and the way that the kind of support and explanations I'm giving are curated to that purpose. So they're definitely, Shane is easier than Crime and Punishment. And if someone were a total novice at literature, I wouldn't recommend that they start with Crime and Punishment. I think that would be more challenging. But at the same time, I've tried to create within the app an experience that anybody can jump into at any point. So there definitely are gradations of accessibility in literature. It's just the Read With Me collection should all be accessible if I've done it right.
But it sounds like
Really?
Raj wants my path feature.
He wants a path, yeah.
Well, I do, but more so for poetry. I find that
Mhm.
we really need more for poetry, because
Mhm.
I at least speaking for myself, it's much more challenging to appreciate poetry. And so if somebody curated 50 poems, here are 50 poems that are not very difficult to grasp if you put in some little bit of effort. Then
One offhand recommendation on that, there's a book called 101 Famous Poems. It's it's on every Barnes and Noble shelf, and I think it's a good entry point into literature. 101 Famous Poems. I can send out a link to it.
Thank you for that.
By the fact that at the end of this chapter, the last thing he says is, there's another obstacle or another thing you have to do to overcome your obstacles, and that's to encounter poetry.
Yeah.
So that's the last thing he leaves us with here is that's going to launch into the next chapter on how to get into verse. And he thinks if you can't get into poetry, if you're not into poetry, then you're going to have real trouble with all kinds of literature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean there are two incredible resources for people who want to start to develop a love of poetry. One is called Sound and Sense. I started a while back to try to do a video series on that, but I never finished that project. But
That was what we did in high school.
Did you?
Yes. Yeah.
I wish people still did.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, it really takes poems and illuminates what's happening in poetry and makes poems accessible. So Sound and Sense is great. And then Elizabeth Drew, Poetry, A Guide to Its, I'm sure I have it somewhere here. Poetry, A Guide to Understanding and Enjoyment, I think is the title of it. Elizabeth Drew. Those are both incredible.
Well, and your lecture, Making Poetry Part of Your Life.
Yes.
That was fantastic.
Who was that?
What's that?
What was it? What was that reference?
I gave a course called Making Poetry Part of Your Life.
Okay.
And that's the one where I used Chapman's Homer and others and tried to shortcut the process with people. I want to make sure we get to chapter 6.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was struck at looking, I guess, right at the beginning of chapter 7, he refers back to chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, having disposed so far as is possible and necessary of that formidable question of style. So I was wondering why he puts it that way. There's the question of style, it's formidable. He had to dispose of it. And as far as is possible and necessary, why is he expressing it that way? What does he do in chapter 6 that allows him to say, I've disposed of it now?
I don't know if this is true, but I felt like he was dealing with pet peeves in chapter 6. And so it felt like he had to dispose of it because it annoys him to no end.
I think it might, and I almost got the sense that he thinks that this is an excuse or an off ramp for people. It's a, something that they run into and say, oh, I just don't like the style, so I don't need to read this one. And he wants to say, no, you're not going to get off on that with me. I'm going to expect you to push through that because style isn't even real.
Or the reverse. I just read for style.
Right.
Or no, sorry. I don't like the style in them, or
I read for content. It's the content, the style. I don't care about care about the style.
Well, let's see. What did I want to say about style? I just loved the concept, the notion of making style and content indistinguishable. That was a very new point to me. And I think I completely agree with it. So this came on the heels of, there's two things. I will sometimes hear people make a very interesting point, a point that I think is true, in a tone that is hostile and condescending toward the world in general. And sometimes I've taken the attitude, okay, well, I need to separate the point from the hostile and condescending framing of the point. And I read this chapter and I thought, no, the hostility and the condescension are part of the content. That is part of the content, because it has to be captured somehow in the words and in the formulation of the content. And then the tone is part and parcel of the content. So I'm not just, needing to do the work of separating it so that I do love the content, but I just don't like the form. It's a package. It's indistinguishable. And then similarly, and it's interesting that he doesn't mention this as one of the stylistic issues, but what comes to mind for me first is presentations that are incredibly dry and boring and academic and sound unrelatable to life. And again, it can feel like, well, the content is good. It's just the dry presentation that's bad. But isn't dryness in presentation a flaw in content? So those were the personal experiences that stood out to me.
Yeah, I actually on that point about no distinction, when you hear somebody speaking in that kind of aggressive tone or something like that, they are saying something with that tone.
Mhm.
You know, like there is an actual, like, you're a bastard for thinking that, you know, just because of the snotty way I said that to you. Like there really is a point. There's content in those sorts of reading between the lines kind of material. So I really do like Bennett making the point of, no, all there really is content in some sense. All you really have is just the stringing together of points. I would have liked it maybe go in more detail of when you organize like a sentence this way, or if you use this kind of colorful description versus this more dry one, you're sneaking in a bunch of content that might not be obvious. I would have liked him to go into more of that just to make his point clearer, but I think that's the kind of thing he's going for.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
thinking about Newton, because we talked about Newton last time and about how he was used as an example of passion, but also dry to, not exactly dry though. There's a passion there and it's literary in a sense, but it's, I don't know, maybe dry isn't the word, but it's essentialized, or it's there's no extra. So maybe that's different in some way from just being dry.
Yeah, that's Newton's interesting. Were you going to say more? Sorry, Heather.
No, go ahead.
So we do parts of Newton in Thomas Aquinas College, and St. John's College is another great book school, also does it. And some people at St. John's. So one of the difficulties with Newton for students compared to Euclid gives you every step, and you just have to remember it, understand it, remember it. Newton does not. He leaves out a lot of steps. So somebody at, I think, St. John's College published a book filling in every step. And the argument goes from being about a paragraph to being about 6 pages long. And it actually kills the experience that when they filled everything out, because you're not able to see the whole anymore. You can see how every step follows, but your head is down like that. So, I mean, there's a way in which Newton's style, which is kind of frustrating for those who are used to being taken care of every step of the way, is actually a beautiful way of focusing your mind on what's most essential in the argument, I think. So he does have a style, and that's one aspect of it, I think.
And Bennett does differentiate. He does talk about the cases in which the style, you might call the style clumsy or something, but that you wouldn't fault. There's still such goodness there that you wouldn't fault the book as a whole, just like you wouldn't a person who tends to spill things, but they're a really good person. So there's the two issues of not saying style is separable from content in the sense that you can like something just for its style, but also not allowing flaws in the style to distract you from the real virtues that are there in the content.
Yeah, it's admitting that there can be both in one person or in one work, and not saying this is either good or it's bad.
Yeah.
So it's I think with that one, would he be saying that there are some authors where their style is excellent for the point for parts of it, but then they're clumsy in other areas. So it's not that oh, there's content underneath when the style is bad, but just that in some areas they're really good, and then they get clumsy in other aspects of it.
I think there were two different. So there was the Carlyle example where he said, people say, well, no, he's amazing, but he just has this this harshness and eccentricities in his style. And he says, no, he is harsh and eccentric, and that's real. That's a real part of him. But he has these other parts of him that are emotional and restrained and beautiful. And so we've got the best parts of Carlyle, and then we've got these other parts of Carlyle that are equally real. But the thing, I'm trying to find a quote for the part that I was talking about. Oh, judge style as you would judge a
towards
man.
the end, right?
Yeah, the page 52 and 53. If the matter is good, but the style is clumsy, you should consider the author as you would a kind-hearted, keen-brained friend who is dangerous to carpets with a teacup in his hand. So I took that to mean, well, he's not, he's not separating style and content, but he's just saying the clumsiness is a part of his style, but it's not the essential part of his style. There's a deeper part of his style that's more essential, because there has to be, if you're recognizing the kind-hearted, keen-brained part that's underneath it, that has to be equally an element of his style. But I did feel like the examples he gave reflected his own kind of pet peeves, and that it was presented on a really abstract level. So I was able to fill in my own pet peeves as he's describing it, but I still just took value from the point that they shouldn't be separated, because I do hear that a lot, I think. Oh, and I just loved the quote about, what would you think of spending a weekend with a solely mellifluous man who was not saying anything, but the words sounded really good.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing a point that I really liked is I think he made the point that basically clear writing is clear thinking. And that's something that I can attest to very much so. During my thesis, there were so many times I had ideas that I thought like, oh, this is going to be great. Oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be another profound point. And as I sort of tried to like write it out in more detail, and then even just writing it out like in full, rigorous style, I realized, no, it's not just that I'm wrong. It's that idea is fundamentally incoherent. I don't even know what I originally vaguely formulated in my mind. Personally, the major moral I took away was so wrong. But I just find like that process of like actually getting it down very clearly on paper and clearly organized, you find out just how little you actually understood.
There's a great quote for that. And when you cannot express yourself, depend upon it that you have nothing precise to express. And that what incommodes you is not the vain desire to express, but the vain desire to think more clearly. So that's a good reminder to all of us. It's not that I know exactly what I want to say, I just can't find the words for it. No, you don't know. That's why you can't find the words for it. Intimidating though. Ray, just so you know, once in a while we kind of lose connection and it gets rough. I don't know if there's anything to be done about that.
I've tried.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted you to know.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes if you're having trouble, you can turn your video off and then your audio will be fine. But
okay.
But it's good right now.
I've been watching the Newton comments. I think it's right that people who try to take what Newton revealed and turn it into a clearer, maybe textbook kind of presentation, they really lose so much of the whole. You lose so much of the whole experience of the discovery and appreciation of it that you get from reading Newton directly. Though maybe some authors may be better at conveying that than others. So it's
well, that even just making the point that is something that ought to be conveyed when you're trying to turn it into a textbook. because that, I think that relates to my frustration with Sparks Notes or Cliff's Notes summaries of things, is that they say what happened, but they say what happened in a way that that takes all the emotional significance of what happened out of it. So a true summary is what I try to do with the focus summaries. A true summary should condense what happened while retaining the spirit of what happened. So that's a good thing to just come out of the idea, the reminder that style and content are one.
And that often the style is maybe difficult. It's going to be more difficult. It's going to make the reading more difficult at first, but vastly more rewarding in the long run. Coming back to the part that you were talking about towards the end of the chapter, Lisa, maybe I'm having some difficulty with this, but this might be helpful to me. He says, in judging the style of an author, you must employ the same canons as you use in judging men. There can be no lasting friendship without respect. If an author's style is such that you cannot respect it, then you may be sure that despite any present pleasure which you may obtain from that author, there is something wrong with this matter and that the pleasure will soon cloy. So that the clumsiness that you might find in an author that really is there, I think he's saying, but that doesn't make you lose respect for his presentation. You recognize maybe he's a little too long-winded here, or he's a little bit, I don't know, confusing in an unhelpful way, but you still respect the style as a whole. Does that seem right, that what he's saying there?
Well, this is one of the great accusations made against Hugo, that he has long historical passages that are departures from the central plot, and you know, again, rely on a knowledge of history that I don't know if his contemporaries even possess, but we certainly don't possess. So is that a flaw in style? That's actually a good concrete for me, because I just say no. And I might not like those passages the most. I might prefer reading the book without them, but his style, you don't, accusing him of having weaknesses of style just seems like, well, then there is no such thing as style. He's the ultimate strength in style. So yeah, it seems like maybe part of it, I could combine the two of the major points we've made today. Part of me thinks, no, there's something really important served in those passages, and I just don't get it yet, and I have to work harder. Or it's that to the extent that they are flaws in style, it's so irrelevant in the big picture because his style is so phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what you told me about, because I remember during Notre Dame, there's one part where the king's recounting some ledger, I think, if I remember. There's it's just, I don't remember the specifics, but I asked you, what am I missing here? Because like, I think you said sometimes they edit that part out as if it was dispensable, and like, I can't remember exactly if you said it was a flaw or not, but I remember the impression I got was that it could be done away with.
Oh, I'm definitely not, I mean, as you know, anybody who read 93, I did cut out the convention. And part of the idea is people do really struggle with it. I struggle with it. And it's not necessary to the central plot. It can be taken out. So don't worry if you struggle with it.
I want to go back also to the beginning here of the
Zach, can we let Zach contribute?
Oh yes, please.
Oh, just about like those things that as a reader, I'm not sure if I enjoyed or not. One thing I'm positive about is that the last book that you did, the Last Day of the Condemned Man, how upset you were that they took out parts that they thought were irrelevant from the plot. Luckily, I bought the wrong book and I had those when I had done it. But I think with these classical things too, he's basically saying you can't throw out, like, it all comes together, and if you don't see it, that's on you, and you can't. So I would say with like Victor Hugo, you don't cut it out. You might not appreciate it, but then someone else might get it and you don't.
Right. Assume that you're missing something rather
Yeah,
than.
and that's what he's getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe if
I read somewhere.
Sorry.
I read somewhere that in Hugo's time, like the novel had not fully evolved into its modern form, and that it was not uncommon for other authors also to have these extensive passages that were not directly related to the plot. So I don't know, Lisa, if you can confirm whether that is correct. I recall reading this.
I don't really know, but one thing anybody who did the chapter a day of Les Miserables with me, we had the great luxury of Stephen Wright participating, who has mapped out the entirety of Les Miserables and can see every thread from every place to every other, and knows all the historical references and intends to write a book, companion book to it at some point. But he, Waterloo is one of the sections in the Waterloo battle in Les Miserables that people are inclined to skip because the main characters disappear in that scene. But number one, they don't entirely disappear. There is one element of that scene that is deeply important to the rest of the plot. And number two, Stephen Wright was able to draw out themes and parallels and metaphorical meanings that were connected to the rest of the book. So that's, I think, to Zach's point, why we just assume that we're missing something rather than skipping it.
I think that's true for Moby Dick and War and Peace as well. They have extensive passages which you rather edit out, and
But you'd miss something.
yeah,
I have a
something
question.
important. Yes.
When you're reading something that has a large section that you've been warned ahead of time, this is a difficult part, just stick through it, you'll get there. What's your thought on skipping the section, finishing the book, and then going back to study later?
I mean, I don't feel regret at having cut out the convention in my recording of 93, precisely because that's what was being recommended as an entry. That's the first book I ever did for Read With Me, and it's an entry point for a lot of people. And because that's a stumbling block for a new reader and not necessary to the whole, I don't have, I think as long as you can be confident that the person telling you that this is okay to omit, that you're confident that they know what they're talking about. Certainly with Hugo, there are those passages. I'd love to make abridged versions for students that are meant to be entry points into Hugo, and then encourage them to go back and read the full thing later.
So we better wrap up.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts? You want to condense things? One thing I guess that struck me is that, at least in these two chapters, for the most part, it seems like people were open to or in agreement with what Bennett is saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that occurred to me, which we kind of mentioned before we got started today. So I think when we first started our discussion of this book, I said, I'm not entirely sure how this book would come off to somebody who's not already sold on the value of literature. It's a perspective I hadn't taken on it when I read it. And when I read it, I just responded to the things that resonated so strongly with me. So in my mind, there are two separate questions here. One is, does he say things with which I agree and say them very beautifully and persuasively and compellingly? And two, does he make a thorough, systematic case for those points that would be persuasive to one who doesn't already agree with those fragmented points? And the jury's still out for me on that.
It would be interesting to read reviews of it and to know how well it was received when he published this.
That would be interesting.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll try to look for some.
In general, he was very successful commercially. Like, I think he sold a lot of books. Bennett sold a lot of books and became relatively rich.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he wrote fiction too?
Yes.
Yeah, which I've never read any of his fiction, but he also wrote a book called How to Live on 24 Hours a Day, which I've heard very strongly recommended to me. All right, any other final thoughts from anyone? Okay, well, I will send out an assignment
Brain,
next
did you want to say something?
soon.
Yeah, I just actually I was thinking about what Raj had said about not liking the way of viewing authors as your mental superiors, and I realized I don't think of them that way. I just try to give them like a really like honest try. I really try to hear them out if I don't like them. I just think of it as, okay, here's someone who's done a lot of work to think about this set of issues. And let me really just see if they're making a good point. And maybe they're just dead wrong and maybe it's not that good. I just, that's my attitude. It's here's another human being who's really tried to figure some stuff out.
That's interesting. I feel very differently. I wouldn't want to take the time. I wouldn't want to spend the time if I didn't regard them as my mental superior. And I feel like they've stood the test of time. I think everybody knows that I love the article, The Ideal English Major by Mark Edmondson. And he says, great authors are, let us admit, shrewder, more intelligent, more observant, more capable of depth of feeling more than the rest of us are. That's why we're wanting to follow along with their vision and their perspective. So to me, that's a big part of the joy and the satisfaction and the pleasure is that it's almost like, I don't know, getting to piggyback on their brilliance. Like I get carried through the world having things illuminated for me that I would entirely miss. I wouldn't see it, or I wouldn't have the ability to capture it so essentially as they do.
I'll have that viewpoint after they've convinced me.
Okay.
Like I got to refer to Tolstoy the God. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
Ray,
I'm not going to read it beforehand.
Ray, I have to respond to you very briefly. What I was saying was, I of course, I'm reading this author because they are my superior in terms of in the context of what I'm reading here. I just meant that does just mean that they are my mentally superior generically. Like the author you're reading would not be your mental superior if math was being discussed. That was my limited point, that it's not like a mental superior sounds like they are mentally superior in everything, as opposed to in this limited sense.
Yeah. Okay.
One quick point before we leave. Jane Eyre is now available in the Read With Me app, and that's our next book that we're doing. So in case you didn't see the email, it is available now in Read With Me. So the first 2 chapters are there, including Lisa's commentary. So definitely check that out.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.